the American president throwing his weight around in this way, threatening to sue a public service broadcaster in this country for the amount that he's threatening to sue it for, I think is disgraceful.
We're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women, and we fight. We fight like hell. We're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women, and we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them.
Does the president feel that the network is taking this situation seriously? Does he believe that they've shown sufficient regret? Does this strain the relationship between the president and the prime minister? And given that the organisation is publicly funded, is the president prepared to bankrupt the BBC in his pursuit of truth and justice?
Well, thank you, Bev. There's a lot of questions in one there. I will say I know the president has a very good relationship with Prime Minister Starmer. However, he has always been very frank when he disagrees with leaders, even whom he has a good relationship with. And the BBC, being a fair news organization, is definitely an outlet. I think these two leaders would disagree. The president has made it very clear that this is a leftist propaganda machine that is unfortunately subsidized by British taxpayers, and he thinks that's extremely unfortunate for the great people of the United Kingdom and Great Britain. And I think that the president was deeply concerned by the editing, the purposeful and dishonest editing of his speech that was so clearly fake news, and he rightfully dubbed that term many years ago, and this is a classic example of that. We see it in the United States all the time. We see it now in the United Kingdom. As you know, the president's external legal counsel has filed a lawsuit against the BBC. We expect that to continue, and whether they apologize or not is up to them.
I think the BBC is in deep trouble here now, especially with this latest revelation. And the problem here is that the bias that's been identified is endemic. I've been monitoring BBC output for 26 years to check for bias in various areas such as Brexit. And nothing that has happened over the past few days, or the past couple of weeks, surprises me at all. The BBC never once looked at my very careful, very deep dive analyses of the bias. And the trouble is that they're their own judge and jury in this respect. They mark their own homework. And the evidence is that very few of the complaints that ever get to the BBC are ever really upheld. So we've got a situation where the BBC is stonewalling in terms of what's happened and has been doing for years and years and years. And what we have now is the situation where and I obviously can't speak in any way for what the president's legal action is likely to do or the effect it's likely to have. But the point is they're on the hook, and they're not. Their apology is mealy-mouthed and incomplete.
And I think he has every right to be. I mean, keep in mind that, number one, this would have, if the Telegraph and the whistleblower hadn't stepped up here, and if GB News and other folks hadn't made such an issue of this, then the BBC never would have corrected it. And the fact is, they're not mad because they did it. They're mad because they got caught. And by the way, when you have your head of news, you have the head of the network step down over this, that's basically an open admission that you know that you did something really, really wrong here. But as we've seen, President Trump has already taken it to a number of different media outlets who have defamed him or have intentionally gone and edited things in a way to make it look like he said something that he didn't. And by the way, President Trump has won over and over and over. I think the BBC is in real trouble. And keep in mind, this isn't even getting to the fact whether you have the license fees that folks in the UK are then paying to the BBC to then go and defame people like President Trump. And keep in mind what the whistleblower also found, the things, whether it be the anti-Israel bias, whether it be the trans issues that they've been covering up or misreporting. So I think the BBC has a real reckoning coming for them.
And that, I think, is what is so gives the people like me who have massive questions about how the BBC portrays the news to the world. What gives us a sense of relief is that somebody has finally shaken their cage. And it doesn't matter whether it's there'll be people watching this who maybe feel a bit ambivalent about President Trump. He's a very divisive figure. But maybe they're furious about how the BBC handles climate change as a fait accompli. It's man-made and you're all going to die and we've got to change the way we live. Or maybe it's about Brexit and how sniffy the BBC is about Brexit. Or maybe it's about illegal migration and how the BBC always portrays illegal migration as something generous that we have to do. Whatever it is, Donald Trump has swung in here like a saviour to all of those people who want to see justice. Who'd have thought that would be the case?
Never would have thought it. As someone who's spent quite a bit of time in the UK over the years, I know how frustrated people are about what they've seen the BBC doing, and the fact that people have to pay for the BBC to then go and misreport and come up with, as Caroline Levitt and others have said, fake news over and over. And so it's really remarkable that President Trump has brought about this culture change. But as I saw with your great interview with FCC Chairman Brendan Carr earlier, this is the sea change that we're seeing here in the United States, as we saw even whether it be ABC and Disney, and President Trump completely turn around the way that business had been done here with the media, censoring certain groups or putting intentionally misleading news. It's a sea change. So it goes to show you one election can make a difference. I know it's a little more difficult when it comes to the BBC and Ofcom in the UK, but we have to get the process started.
But first of all, the principle of the American president throwing his weight around in this way, threatening to sue a public service broadcaster in this country for the amount that he's threatening to sue it for, I think is disgraceful. I think it could have a very serious chilling effect on free speech. We're constantly told that people on the right, not everyone, are absolutely glued to the principle of free speech. And if people think that the American president, the leader of the most powerful democracy in the world, is going to sue people, then I think that has a fundamental issue for free speech. On the substance of the BBC mistake, and it certainly was a mistake that they have apologised for, and I think rightly so, I do not believe, and I worked at the BBC for 8.5 years, almost entirely in news, I do not believe that it was malicious. The BBC have said themselves it was not malicious, and as we understand it, libel law in America, defamation law in America, you have to prove malice, or malice has to be a part of it. Now, what does malice mean in this context? Malice would mean that the BBC, in this case an independent production company because they produced the Panorama, was sitting there thinking, how can we defame Trump? How can we, to use the word you used earlier, and I don't think it's the right word, doctor this footage to make Trump look bad? I don't believe that's what they did. I think they made an editorial misjudgment. And unfortunately, where you have human beings, and the BBC is staffed by thousands of human beings, sometimes, and you've worked in broadcasting, both of you, for years, as have I, sometimes you make mistakes. And when you make mistakes, particularly if you're the BBC, where there absolutely should be impartiality and accuracy, you apologise, and that's what they've done. The idea you pay money for it is absurd.
Welcome to BBC Verify. Like you said, we are a team of investigative journalists here at the BBC. We are also a new brand, and we are a physical location above the newsroom in London. And the point of the team, as you said, is to verify video, to fact check, to counter disinformation, and to analyse really complex stories so we can get to the truth of what's going on. Why does this matter? Well, mistruths can cause really serious harm to society and to the people in them. And so we want to show you our workings and really help you understand how we get to the bottom of what's happening. And then there's also investigating other mistruths and the real world harm they can cause. At the moment, I'm investigating the UK's conspiracy theory movement. I'm trying to understand more about how it's evolved and intensified since the pandemic here in the UK. I'm looking at the alternative media that finds itself at the heart of this movement, and a conspiracy theory newspaper that's a part of that as well. I'm looking at the way that alternative media is funded. I'm looking at its impact on local communities. I'm looking at its connections with far-right figures, and also its foreign links. That's for a podcast series that will be coming out in June. It's called Mariana in Conspiracy Land.
And what other... Yeah, how can an organisation be so pompous, so self-satisfied that said, well, you know, we'll check our own facts, thank you very much? Well, that's great. They're always going, BBC reporters always go, according to BBC Verify, you know, as if that is, you know, the holy grail. That must be. Oh, well, if BBC Verify have confirmed it, it must be true. This is the department that mixed up acres with hectares and therefore got some agricultural information wrong. You know, it's always getting things wrong. It's the worst thing that the BBC has ever done. It's an absolutely pompous, useless, pointless waste of time, and they're in trouble again. They're in trouble again. This time it's serious, very serious. Stephen, let's well, look, we're talking about Panorama. Back in 2021, when Donald Trump claimed he'd been robbed of the presidency, should have won the election against Biden. There was that insurrectionist march by the mob onto Capitol Hill. We all remember that. And the Panorama show, in a program they put out last month, they made it look, they made it look as if he made a speech that actually urged the public to launch that march on Capitol Hill. Well, he didn't.
It's taken out of context. Like, often I see a complaint, oh, he said this and that. I go, yeah, but you haven't done the first minute when I explain what I'm going to do, and then the minute after that where I undermine it all. So you can't worry about that, because I think it's willful. Now, some people are stupid and don't get it when you talk about taboo subjects, or they don't get it. But some people do get it and they pretend not to. They willfully do a horrible headline because it's clickbait and people don't read the article. Even if they explain the joke in the article, which they shouldn't fucking do, don't fucking print jokes. Why do people think it's okay to print jokes? You wouldn't do a review of The Sixth Sense and say Bruce Willis was brilliant as the ghost. What about fucking spoiler alert, dude? It's not fair, is it? It's not fair. So, apart from all that, and I never complained about the audiences. The audiences are great. I played to 800,000 people on Humanity. Not one, everyone laughing all the time. As soon as it goes on Netflix, and then a little bit goes on YouTube, someone go, "Oh, this is not on." You weren't there, mate. You don't know. You weren't there. You're not a fan. I give a fuck about your opinion.
This all started with the Panorama edit. I've just got this in. This is just breaking news, Emma, which relates to this story. We're just hearing that the BBC has apologised to Donald Trump over the editing of a speech which appeared on Panorama in 2024, adding it was an error of judgment and the programme will not be broadcast again in this form on any BBC platforms. So that's the BBC apologising directly to the President of the United States over the editing of a speech that appeared on Panorama in 2024. But Emma, by the sounds of it, there might be another apology to make.
Yeah, so that was the one that's caused such a furore over the last week or so, that resulted on Sunday night in the Director General of the BBC, the big boss, Tim Davie, resigning. Also, the Chief Executive of BBC News, Deborah Turness, both of those leaving their roles. Then the BBC Chair apologising for what he called an error of judgment. So this really has been the focus of enormous attention. Now we're talking about this Newsnight programme. And what's really interesting about it, according to the Telegraph, who've broken this story, a live guest straight after that speech was played out on Newsnight pointed out that it had been cut incorrectly, changing the meaning. And according to the Telegraph, nothing was done on air to say apologise or to address that.
Yeah, to alert people that it had happened.
Yeah, and then the next morning in an editorial meeting, it said that it was discussed there, concerns were raised, nothing was done then. There has been a response from the BBC, a BBC spokesperson saying the BBC holds itself to the highest editorial standards. This matter has been brought to our attention and we are now looking into this. It's really important, just quickly, to say that the timing here is absolutely crucial, because a lawyer for Donald Trump threatened to sue the BBC for a whopping $1 billion, saying they needed an apology. Well, we got that now, haven't we? And a retraction. It's not been played again for false, defamatory, disparaging and inflammatory statements. And the deadline was Friday, 10 p.m. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that apology has come in. Emma, for the moment, thank you. Just to reiterate that breaking news, the BBC has apologised to Donald Trump over the editing of a speech which appeared on a Panorama programme back in 2024. The organisation saying it was an error of judgment and the programme will not be broadcast again in this form on any BBC platforms.
The revelation which I dealt with the other night on the show, that the BBC had deliberately falsified a speech by Donald Trump on the so-called insurrection on January 6th. By the way, when you call it a so-called insurrection, you still get completely repressed on social media. I had 7 million views on my Facebook page in the last 7 days. But the one video that got hardly any views at all was the one that described January 6th in the terms I just have. But anyway, Trump is now suing the BBC for $1 billion. I mean, you need a heart of stone not to laugh. You know, Kissinger once said about the Iran-Iraq war, it's a pity both sides can't lose. That's what most of us feel about a battle between Donald Trump and the BBC, each as venal as the other. In this case, because I hate the BBC so much and because I have so much bitter experience of them, I kind of hope he gets his billion and that the BBC goes bankrupt. Defund the BBC is definitely my viewpoint.